Good afternoon. My name is Delon, and I am going to give you a little speech about planes, trains, and automobiles. I was super excited to see this movie on the list. This movie came out in 1987. It's one of my favorites. It has two of my favorite actors in it. John Candy, who plays Del Griffith, a shower curtain ring salesman, and Neil Page, played by Steve Martin, who is an ad executive. And as the movie starts out, Neil Page, or Steve Martin, is sitting in a meeting with as an ad executive, waiting for a client to make a decision on some storyboards that he's previewing, and it's dead quiet in this room, and there's a bunch of people sitting in the boardroom, and he's patiently tapping his watch and trying to whisper to a coworker that he just needs to get out of there. He has to get going. He's trying to catch a plane home. But he's whispering, and his coworker can't quite understand him, which is a barrier to effective communication. And Neil didn't want to get louder because he didn't want to tip off his client that he was impatient and trying to leave. So the meeting finally wraps up, and Del is rushing out to get to a cab. He spots a cab stand, and another guy spots the cab stand. They are both racing for this same cab. A lot of nonverbals. They keep looking at each other and such. And eventually Neil falls down, and the other guy gets the cab. He gets up, goes to the next cab, and there's a guy there jumping in the cab, and he says, "Sir, I'm trying to get home out of the kindness of your heart. Would you allow me to take your cab?" And he said, "No, sir, I do not have a kind heart." I feel like at that point Neil was kind of a little out of a cultural, social difference in communication because he's not from there. The guy says, Neil first offers him $10 for it, and the guy's like, "I would not take $10 for this." And so he offers him 50. And he goes, "I'll take $50 for this cab." And Neil goes to pay him $50, and the guy goes, "Well, surely somebody who's willing to give me $50 will give me 75." So eventually they decide to make the transaction. The guy's like, "I don't have a kind heart, I'm a lawyer." And as they're making their transaction, the cab pulls away. So Neil proceeds to chase after the cab, and when he catches up to it because it's stuck in traffic, he locks eyes with, you guessed it, Del Griffith, the shower curtain ring salesman, and he tells him he needs to get out of his cab. That's his cab. He paid for it, and the cab takes off. Well, needless to say, eventually Neil gets to the airport. The flight is delayed, but he does make it. They get on a flight, only for him to have been downgraded to coach instead of flying first class flight, which he had paid for. He argues with the stewardess. He's very rude, and I feel like it's a little bit of a barrier to effective communication with the opposite gender. I feel like Neil thought if he could bully her or kind of be manly, that she might back down, which she didn't. And another good-looking guy gets on, kisses her on the cheek, calls her by name, and this guy gets what he wants, which I feel like is effective communication with the opposite gender. He was kind. He lived by the old adage that you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. So as the flight is in air and on its way to Chicago, he finds himself sitting next to Del Griffith. And Del takes off his shoes and his socks, and he's waving around his socks and talking about his dogs barking, how it feels so good to get his feet out of those shoes. I feel like he was being a little mindless of the people around him, and there's a little bit of society communication there. I mean, it doesn't feel like an appropriate thing that he should be doing. Not something you usually see people doing in society on an airplane. And so finally they find themselves landing, but they're not landing in Chicago. they're landing in Wichita, Kansas. So they find themselves in Wichita, and instead of calling to find a hotel, Neil decides to call his wife and still says that he will be home probably no later than 10 that night. Whereas Dell, using a self-fulfilling prophecy and realizing most likely they're going to be stranded in Wichita, finds a motel room. So once the flight is canceled to Chicago, Neil and Dell are talking, and Dell's like, hey, I know a guy. I've already got a motel room. Him and I are friends. I sold him all of his shower curtain rings. Why don't you come with me? If you pay for the taxi ride, I will get you a motel room. So this taxi comes, and it's quite a doozy. It's all decked out, and the guy in it is really backwoods, weird looking, scary guy. He's traveling all over the place and not taking them right to their motel. And Neil said, it's the middle of the night. Why isn't he taking us to our hotel? And the guy's like, well, you've never been around here before. I thought maybe you would like to see some of the sights as we're going to your motel. So there again, it's kind of a cultural, different kind of communication. So now they are at the motel, and Dell offers to let Neil shower first. You know, he's a very kind guy. Neil couldn't get his own room, so he ends up staying in a room with Dell. And he takes a shower and gets out of the shower and looks around. The only thing left for him to dry off with is a washcloth, because he is finding that Dell is kind of a slob. He's got stuff everywhere. He's got his socks and underwear soaking in the sink. He's kind of a slob. In the meantime, he just decides to make the best of it, goes out and gets into an argument with, well, first of all, he crawls into bed. The bed's full of beer because Dell did something and he spilled beer on the bed and all these different things. And he's like trying to clear his sinuses, and Neil's trying to sleep. And finally, Neil gets upset, jumps out of bed, starts belittling Dell, telling him that he's boring, his stories are terrible, or his little anecdotes, and how all he does is talk and all this, just berating him. And at that point, Neil is kind of putting out a perception of others. He doesn't know Dell that well. He just knows that Dell is different. And he isn't very nice about it as he puts his perception out of what he thinks of Dell. And Dell comes back with how his wife loves him, his family loves him, his clients love him. So kind of doesn't really care if Neil likes him or not. At that point, he kind of puts out his own self-esteem, self-concept, kind of a communication to Neil just to let him know that he doesn't care if he likes him or not. So they finally get some sleep. The next morning, they wake up cuddling kind of in an intimate way. And when they realize what's happening and they're both fully awake, they jump out of bed and they start talking about sports and how the Bears have a great team this year and such, which kind of leads to like a mode of a satire mode where they're trying to placate it, push it down a little bit, make it a little less embarrassing. So sometime in the middle of the night, a young guy sneaks into their room and robs them. So the next morning at breakfast, after their little intimate, weird situation happened, they're eating breakfast and Neil goes to pay for it and his wallet's empty. And he immediately blames Dell for robbing him, which he did not. And they kind of get into an argument, and they look in Dell's wallet and it's also empty. So then they realize that they've been robbed, where as in Dell says, I guess we were robbed, and Neil makes fun of him by going, "Do you think so?" And so there again, he put out a perception of Dell not really knowing him, kind of judging him, and had that snide communication going. He had a lot of verbal cues in this movie and a lot of non-verbal cues in this movie. And as they figure that out, then Dell's like, "Well, I have a friend that works on the train. Let's I've talked to him. He's going to send his son to pick us up to get us to the train station." And Dell's like, "If you can get me on the train, we're square with money of any kind that might be out." So they're sitting outside waiting, and this beat up old pickup truck pulls up, and a guy that's very backwoods, very greasy looking, gets out, introduces himself as his friends, as Dell's friend's son, and says he's here to take him to the train station. As they're trying to load their stuff in the truck, the guy that is giving them a ride yells at his wife to get her lazy behind out of the truck and load up their stuff. And they're like, "No, no, that's okay. Neil and Dell didn't want her help because she's a lady. They didn't want her help." So um, he says, "Well, she gave birth to her first kid and it came out sideways and she never screamed. She's really strong and tough." Which again is a little bit cultural and kind of a cultural ineffective communication about gender, and so they said, "Nope, nope, we got it." They loaded it up and they moved on. The train breaks down along the way. These two have got more misadventures. And then when Neil finally gets to a spot where he can rent a car, he gets dropped off in this lot by a bus. The bus driver mumbles something that's incoherent, and which is in an ineffective um, communication barrier. He gets to the slot where this car should be, and it's not there. He walks back to the desk and proceeds to yell an F-bomb at this sweet little lady behind the desk who didn't take it, and when he couldn't produce his receipt, she told him in an F-bomb way back that he was out of luck. In other words, he uses his anger to try to get what he wants from a female, kind of a gender effective communication that's non-effective. So he gets outside, barks at a guy that's in the cab stand, and the guy punches him out, knocks him into the street where he is almost run over by Dell, who has a car. As they're driving, Dell smokes and he threw a cigarette out and it blew into the back seat. He's trying to get his parka off because it's hot, but he gets tangled in stuff in the car. Almost has an accident. When he pulls back out on the road, he's going the wrong direction on the interstate, and people are pulling up alongside of him, yelling at him, telling him that he's going the wrong way. It was loud, it was dark, ineffective communication. And they ended up having an accident where they went down the inside of two different semis, and their lives are flashing before their eyes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I'm going to cut this short. I wrote a longer speech. I'm running out of time. They did make it back to Chicago, and as Neil is heading towards his house on the L train, stops and thinks about Dell and realizes that Dell is alone. Goes back, talks to him, finds out that his wife died 8 years ago, so he pretty much travels and sells shower curtain rings all the time, has no permanent home. So he takes him home for Thanksgiving, introduces him to his family, and I feel like the moral of this story is Always be kind. You never know what someone's going through.